This is the 100th episode of Rod Suskin's World on CapeTownTV. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to celebrate today by sharing some of my favorite interviews and some of my favorite thoughts with you. Starting with an interview with that amazing author Sarah Jane King, well-known Cape Talk radio host, telling the remarkable, sometimes shocking story of her adoption in her memoir, Killing Caroline. Tell us.
So the title of this, obviously, of the book is Killing Caroline, and Caroline was me, is me. I was born in Joburg in 1980. My biological mother is a white British woman who had come to South Africa to live with her then boyfriend, who was a South African guy. They met in the UK, they were studying there, and they came back here. She'd never been to South Africa, and while they were living and working in Joburg at the Balalaika Hotel, there she met my biological father, a black guy. I don't know a great deal of information about him. They got involved in what at the time would have been an illegal relationship, an illegal affair. So she became pregnant with me, but obviously it was still officially with her white South African boyfriend. They hastily got married because she was pregnant. And then 9 months later, I appeared, and she was forced to tell him the truth about what had happened. And a plan had to be arranged, or something had to come up with why they would need to take me out of the country. The plan was to go and have me adopted in the UK, which they did. And so they concocted this story that I had a very rare kidney disease, which I was shipped away to the UK and adopted there. And when they returned, my biological mother and her husband, they told everyone Caroline died overseas. We hear a lot about this these days, this colour blindness. In my opinion, colour blindness has no place in South Africa. It can't. It has no place anywhere. And it's often used by people as an excuse for not wanting to understand. And also as a cloak for racism.
I am a victim of the cultural belief system that says, oh, you know, adoption is such a good thing for children who would never have a home and for people who would never have children, and trying to imagine what it's like. And we always looking for, as long as they told you and they were nice to you, then it must have been a great experience.
Absolutely.
And then reading your book, I felt for the first time in my whole life that I heard what an adoptee was saying. I heard what it felt like. And that strange kind of alienation. You said something which I think really, it was so pointed, it sums up the whole thing for me. And you said, adoption is a very bitter, very white pill designed to kill 3 unfortunate birds with 1 stone.
Adoption always starts with pain.
Always starts with pain. And perhaps that's why, no matter how well integrated as a member of that family an adoptee is, they're eventually going to have an identity crisis of some kind.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because in writing this book, I've had a lot of adoptive families and people who are involved in the adoption triad say, so it sounds like you're very anti-adoption, And it's not that I'm anti-adoption, it's that I'm anti not looking at the root of this pain.
Right. Because,
and it's the whitewashing, it's the covering up, it's the shaking off, putting a new name on and bringing up as your own. And that's fine. It's one thing to love your child as if it came from your own body. It's another thing to ignore that it didn't.
Right. Health and complementary medicine has always been an interest to me, so I took the opportunity to speak to Dillian Totten of Natural Medicine World online and find out what the latest trends are really all about. So, you know, obviously complementary medicines, alternative medicines, they've always been seen as a little bit fringe, but over the years I think they became more acceptable and more popular. Certainly probiotics actually eventually entered the mainstream, and now almost any doctor is going to prescribe them. Have you seen the same happen with other therapies, practices becoming more acceptable?
Actually, the same kind of surge I saw in the awareness and the use of complementary medicine, natural medicine, by the man in the street wanting to take their power back. I see the same thing happening with energy medicine now, light therapy, and just the awareness of a much more sacred form of healing, and not the very masculine cut and surgery and burn and radiation and chemo, but a much bigger awareness in energy medicine and light medicine.
So is there any backlash?
Yes, there's a backlash. There's always a backlash, but I think it's more difficult now because of the scientific research and the tools we have to measure the effect of light therapy, of magnetic therapy, of energy medicine. I mean, the Germans, for example, they are very progressive when it comes to energy medicine.
So one thing that has, I think, also happened though in the same time is that natural remedies have been increasingly regulated. We've seen that in Europe and the States, and I think more and more here.
Yeah.
So is that not a pushback? I mean, how does that balance against the fact that things are becoming more accepted?
It's a big pushback. I think there's obviously a lot of money in complementary medicine, and there's a lot of groups that want to stop the progression and want to control what people use. And you know, in some instances, they have reason, you know, and we all want to regulate our industry.
Yeah.
We're not against regulations.
Because we want quality.
We want quality, we want good GMP practice, we want to know that our herbs come from somewhere where it wasn't excessively sprayed, you know, and that the extraction method is correct and everything is clean and so on and so on. It's not adulterated, you don't get extra fillers and things added to your product, and your standardization is there. You want all that. But you don't want to be told what you can't take.
Exactly. So I'm sure over the years you've seen, let's call them many trends, come and go with respect to health and healthy lifestyles and so on. We have definitely seen an increase, a surge, if you like, of interest in veganism. Is it a fad? Is it a craze? Does it resemble those kind of things that you've seen before, or is something actually changing?
I think it's a consciousness. I think it's an awareness. I'm a really big fan and student of energy medicine and of vibrational medicine and metaphysical studies, and for me that is an absolute sign of the times.
So it's going to increase. I mean, is there going to be a world where people don't eat animals one day?
Never. There'll always be people who would eat animals, but you know, it's just if you are a conscious, aware, spiritual human being, you don't need to be necessarily vegan. I just want to put that out there, and I mean, everybody's unique in their body's needs, but I think just the awareness of the mass production, the overkilling of animals would advance us in our consciousness.
Is there anything else that you would say, that's the obvious one, is there anything else that you can see because of your work that's beginning to become known and that might be the next conscious wave?
What excites me is young students seeking raw food bars and juicing. The students at university, because I have two children at university, my stepson and my daughter went through university, just a change, you know, in no longer a burger and Coke, but rather a raw juice or a wrap. So I definitely see that.
What I like about that is that if they're the students, then they're the next generation.
Yes.
They're going to be bringing up their kids like that.
Yeah.
Tell us how to find the show.
Nutmedworld.com. Naturalmedicineworld.com.
And then they can find the show and other resources that you've got there for them.
Yes, it's all on there.
So. One health trend that really has been in the public eye these days is fasting. Even though it's been around for years, it really seems to have been taking off as a health maintenance and healing method. So I spoke to expert Alexandra Cousins. Firstly, let me ask you the question, is there evidence that fasting improves length of life and quality of life?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are studies, you know, there's a lot of studies, or starting, there's a lot of studies. You know, that's where there's conflicting information, because in many ways for the whole medicine world, it's not exactly what they want to promote. Fasting is what not only, I mean, yes, longevity now, that's, or you know, it's too early to say in that sense.
Sure.
As much as I have already seen the age reversing effects of that, and I see the same thing in my husband, and I see it in clients that have been going with me for a while. But certainly in terms of healing, there is nothing better than fasting.
So it can be used when you have a specific health problem as a form of treatment?
Absolutely.
What type of health problems would you think?
That's, where it becomes funny and not funny, because it's any health problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, people always come, oh, but I have got this special thing.
Right.
I'm special,
yeah.
I'm different, mine is really bad. And it's like, well, no matter what it is, fasting can heal it, because also and then they go, but how is it possible that a slip disc? Because that's mechanical.
Right.
It's not, actually. We have slip disc, we have hernia when we have weakness in the tissue, in connective tissue. When we have a parathyroid weakness, which we are mostly born with, because our health does not only depend on what we do in this lifetime to our bodies, but it depends on our ancestors, our parents, how they lived. So the simplest thing to understand is really that all disease is an accumulation of toxicity and an accumulation of mucus in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, when we look at foods, often there's so much talk about, oh, this food is healthy and eating is healthy. No food is healthy in the strictest term, because every food that we ingest leaves some sort of residue. But on a continuum, there is food, like for example fruit and vegetables. So fruit are the lowest on the continuum of mucus creating, to the point where fruit kind of create really zero mucus. Then we move on to greens and vegetables, and they also create a minimal, but it's so minimal it's negligible. And it's why fruit and vegetable are mucus free.
Mm-hmm.
But then we move over to the grains, and then there's a range again, certain grains like spelt and millet and quinoa that are alkaline, they don't create mucus in the body, or rather they're considered mucus lean because they create a little bit of mucus. Then we move to the glutinous, like wheat and so forth, they create mucus in the body. And then we look at animal products, a lot of waste in the body. So in terms of my understanding, there's only really 3 factors that make up good or bad foods. It's the understanding of how nutrition dense a food is, and then how much waste does the food leave behind in the body, and how much waste does the food take out of the body. Mm-hmm. When we fast, there's a lot of mechanisms that happen in the body, which obviously is, on one hand, we are stopping the addition of toxicity. So we are stopping the process of mucus producing and toxicity. So that already is a great help. Right. And as we do that, our body all of a sudden has time and energy, more than anything, energy, to allow the elimination of toxicity, which normally, because we eat 3 times a day, most of us 6 times a day, which is completely crazy, but we've made it normal, and so it's okay in our minds. And as we stop eating, the digestive process is laid to rest, and our natural way of eliminating toxicity kicks into place, because all of a sudden there is space for that.
I really was lucky to speak to the amazing journalist and author Marianne Tom about her recent memoir, Hitler, Verwoed, Mandela and Me. She's a remarkable lady, and we had a great conversation. How conscious were you early on about what's happening in this country?
I was very conscious, and I think I see it now. I see all the differences that I embody as blessings, because when you feel out of place in a community, and that was a white mixed English Afrikaans speaking immigrant community in Pretoria, and you could, the Afrikaans kids were working class and quite hostile towards us, but that was fun as a child. But I saw the responses to black South Africans around me, the yellow vans arriving, just arresting people en masse. As a child witnessing that, you realize something's very wrong here. And so apart from the Holocaust and the number of people persecuted and killed, and was the kind of, I felt the spiritual aftermath of what did that do to people in Europe? What did that do to my father? How did this happen? And how come somebody in my house, he's not just in books, there's somebody walking around in my house who did this. I am from him and of him. And I think that I found existentially very painful to deal with, and and it keeps evolving, and it keeps taking new shapes as I've let go of him in one way, come to terms with him in the book another way. I've put him in his it's like a hard drive. I've downloaded him. I saw his interaction with other people, and that's what really mattered to me more than what he said.
Exactly.
My father was never rude to anybody. My father was, despite himself, immediately fell in love with my children. And
well, his reaction to your children was just
incredible.
like amazing.
It was really beautiful. Because I warned him. I said to him, I detect anything, and they're out of your life. And he was unable to help himself. And I was looking for that.
Yeah.
That spirit that was unable to help itself, that just fell in love with the children. And my mother also had a stroke a long, long time before that. So I lost her almost in that way. But she's always there as well. I mustn't forget her. That feminine energy, I mustn't forget her. All the people I've met who are relatively intact and able to fight quite an oppressive system have mothers who've loved them ridiculously. So my mother did that for my brother and I. She just absolutely adored us, thought we were wonderful, which we did too for a very long period of time until we realized that, one of my first girlfriends said, look, I just thought I was lovable. I didn't have to do anything bad. So my mom, has given me what I call this panic room, this nest inside of myself that I can retreat into when I feel it's too much, and it's very safe and wonderfully loving, and then I can from there always, I'm surprised myself, plot a comeback. I had a very naive and childish reason for entering journalism, and that was really simply saying I wanted to tell the truth.
Well,
I could see that what was going on around me just wasn't what was just wasn't okay, and then I thought this would be quite a nice way to find a platform with my messianic complex that I would fix this. What? The other space that has held me and nourished me and opened up what that other world was, and that's the arts. Right. It was theatre, poetry, music. It came into my life just as I needed it, and it was as confrontational. And I realized that this space had a kind of a different ethos to it. There was a light to the brutality and the darkness. There was a shaping of the narrative that could be taken back and could be regurgitated and presented back. The truth-telling had more layering. I think the universe is indifferent most of the time. But I also am so open to other ways of thinking, which is why I love living in Africa and South Africa. It makes perfect sense to me. To live with the notion of ancestral guidance. I feel my father. White South Africans have lived for many years in a world that is of champagne parties and no worries, swimming pools and Chevrolet. And that's what everybody else wants. But it's not what we should be wanting. We should be wanting. That's what surprised me the most about the South African transition, is I thought we'd become more African. I think it was just the systems were so entrenched that it wasn't possible to dislodge it. And I think it's human nature to want those things. And I'm not sure globally what capitalism, I loathe it. And people think when I say that I'm a communist. I'm a social democrat. I would like us all to have enough.
You might know I've been doing that series on Stoicism as the year has been going by, and there's still more to talk about. But what really kicked it off was a book called Happy by magician Darren Brown, which gave us the basic principles based on Stoicism about how to be happy. Here they are. How to find ourselves as human beings and how to be happy as human beings was seen to be a solution that could be rationally solved by the Stoic philosophers. Like I was saying, while it's often Buddhism that is said to suit the Western mind, turns out that there are traditions in the past of our Western culture that also really suit the rational approach that we have long taken, at least since the time of the ancient Greeks in the few hundred years BC, taken that rational approach to understanding ourselves and understanding our problems. So the Stoics applied that to happiness, and Darren Brown has applied his thinking to that. And I want to give you a couple of the takeaways from Darren Brown's book about happiness, because I think he really manages to sum up many of the Stoic ideas very well. The first thing he says, which is often contrary to what other people say when talking about happiness, is get rid of positive thinking. Positive thinking, he says, tends actually to be stressful, and it's largely a kind of a dangerous belief in magic. Derren Brown is a magician, and like performing magicians, he insists that really magic is, of course, an art of deception and an art of entertainment. It isn't something real. And so he jumps on positive thinking to say that people who relentlessly think positively, and he gives the example of that rather ridiculous book and philosophy, The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, where you believe that you can manifest everything, and by thinking it so makes it so. That type of thinking is a stressful kind of thinking, because basically you put the responsibility for everything that happens onto yourself. Life experience shows that we might be responsible for our own actions and our own reactions, but we're not responsible for everything else that's happening around us. Brown says, following the ideas of the Stoic philosophers, you can choose the attitude you take to events. You might not be able to control an event itself. Stuff happens and you can't control for that. Other people do stuff. Stuff happens in the world. You can't control all of that. You see terrible things on the news and on your social media and all of that, and you can't control for that. Positive thinking ain't going to help. But what you can control for is how you respond to that. It takes practice, but it works. Take the drama out. The second thing is control your desires and appreciate what you have. The thing about desires, as the ancient wisdom teaches us, is that desires are never satisfied. They're only temporarily satisfied. So whatever you want, getting it inevitably makes you want more or the next thing or better. I mean, why do we keep upgrading our phones? A very important third principle is surrendering the need to control other people and situations. And actually, if you surrender the need to control other people, essentially you will live a life free of stress, free of worry, free of concern for things which are really not in your control. Only your own thoughts and your own actions are in your control. Nothing else is, not even that of your children. And especially learning to let go of what is not in your control is profoundly liberating. It really gets you off the hook for a whole bunch of stuff that is causing stress and unhappiness. Derren Brown says, knowing the difference between what you can't control, which is almost everything, and what you can control, your thoughts and actions, is one of the most liberating realizations that you can have as a human being. That is true, and it's a very powerful statement. It takes discipline, it takes practice. Our instinct wants to control because control makes us feel secure. But letting go of control is the most liberating thing, because if you're honest with yourself, you don't have control. So stop trying to hold on to what you don't have. It causes stress, anxiety, and unhappiness. A very important source of unhappiness is anger. And you might think, oh, anger doesn't come up very often, but anger comes up more often than it ever used to because of social media. We see something on social media, it's usually fake, but even still, makes us angry, we get into reaction, often get into a fight. Not only social media, I mean, so many things make us angry and irritate us. Something really important to do is to manage your expectations. Life doesn't always go according to plan. So if we're rational and realistic about it, we realize that unexpected stuff happens all the time, and the only thing that I can control is my reaction to that. So getting angry when things don't go as planned is irrational in the extreme, because it's a prime example of responding to something you're not in control of, changing your own emotional state to a negative one, and in the end, achieving nothing. In fact, if you manage your expectations and take a more realistic approach, not only will you not experience all that happiness, you'll experience a lot more success, because success comes out of the reality of the situation, not what you imagine that it is. Finally, the last key point that Derren Brown talks about and which is important in the management of happiness in so many different philosophies, and that is to redefine your story. It doesn't mean lying to yourself, about what's happened to you, but what it relates to is the fact that our picture of ourselves and what we project into the world and how we've experienced particular things is really a narrative that we tell ourselves. So particularly our unhappiness about our past and our happiness about our lives is based on the interpretation of the story we tell ourselves about our lives. So many great books to read, so many great people to interview, and so many great things to discuss. There's so much more. So I will be back starting year 3, and I hope you will be joining me next week, Friday, at the usual time. See you then.